I hope you had a good Thanksgiving. Welcome back to the podcast. Now, what are we going to be talking about this week? We're going to be talking a little bit about strategy and some of the ways that we can get a little bit off course. But let's dive into things. Welcome to the Enemies Within the Church podcast. You can go to EWTC News, that stands for Enemies Within the Church News, EWTCnews.com to, view the documentary if you haven't done that. You can also stay up to date with our current projects, which this podcast is part of. There are also some articles that we post from time to time there as well. Try and be useful, and you can also go to the Patreon for the podcast or the Give, Send, Go. Either one of those, if you want to support the podcast. And that is, again, as I clarify every time, that's specifically for me, for the time I take out from everything else to do the podcast. We can't afford to pay for the podcast while we're trying to do some larger documentary projects. So if you would like to see this continue, please consider going and supporting at one of those two locations. Now, what are we talking about this week? Well, like I said, we're going to be talking a little bit about strategy, because I think it's great. I think there are a lot of people doing a great job about pointing out problems right now, pointing out what the problems are, but solutions seem to be a little bit few and far between, and even strategy for fighting isn't exactly clear. And I'll try and clear that up, because I think you might be thinking certain things. You go, oh, well, what about that? Here's this thing. This person said that. I'll clarify a little bit. And I'm not saying that everyone is failing on this point. I'm just saying, in a little bit of a generalization, we're not doing as well as we could. We're not being as efficient as we could. And it causes some problems. But I want to talk about... Well, I want to start off with this way. I want to start off with this. So I'm going to tell you about someone that I met 2015. So basically almost a decade ago at this point, which is crazy to think about. But this was at a Bible college. And, this was not someone that I had one conversation with. This is someone that I got to know over the course of being in a couple different classes. This is someone that interacted somewhat outside of classes, including helping record an interview that was done with him. And he was a self-described, self-professed alt-right member. Yeah, this was that era, the pre-Trump election and just post, the 2015, 2016 era, when the alt-right was a thing. And it was fascinating. Deeply terrifying, some of the things he would say. But it was also very fascinating to learn about this movement. And like I said, this was not one conversation. This wasn't someone that was just saying random things. This was someone who legitimately held a belief system, could define it, loved to talk about it. And I think there's some useful pieces in here. Useful pieces. Now, broadly, what were the kind of things he wanted to see? What were some of the broad things he wanted to see? Well, he saw the American system as broken, that we needed a strong man to fix things. And that strong man, the type of leader they wanted, they thought it was going to be Donald Trump. But they wanted a fascist dictator. And it was fascinating, because how does that work out exactly? Talking with him a little bit more, it was all about having the flexibility to fix the problems wherever they pop up and how they change over time through the course of repairing things. So for a time, this is the things he was saying. For a time, we'd be under a more fascist socialist system. And at times we might be able to be under a more free and capitalist system. But we needed this strong man to sit above everyone else and dictate things. to be able to give that direction and have it followed. And that was just some wild stuff. Wild stuff. But he went further. What were some of the problems? Well, some of the problems were multiculturalism. Well, he went much further than that. No, it wasn't just multiculturalism, because culture wasn't simply just uh, a product of shared beliefs and shared customs. It was not part of ethnicity. Multiculturalism, culture itself was a product of skin color. It was a product of race, how he defined it. And it was super broad. If you were European, whatever European actually is, you were white, whatever white actually is. It became circular reasoning there, because it was like, okay, I asked him, well, what is white? Well, those of European descent. Well, what is European? Well, white people from the continent of Europe. Well, what's white? There's so many problems with that definition. So many. Well, I mean, getting circular reasoning, but there's so many problems with that definition because it defines nothing. It's so arbitrary. So arbitrary. As Sam and I had fun with in our episodes about ethnicity. But America, to fix the problems, America needed to regain its culture, and its culture was this white European culture. Monolithic. They're not multiple. There's a single culture. Everyone that came over from Europe, by his definitions of who these people are, they all shared one monolithic culture. And he was not a white supremacist. He made this and this was fascinating. Again, fascinating to learn. He was not a white supremacist. He did not view white people as inherently superior. He viewed a need, as he said it, he used a couple different terms, but one of the terms he used was a white separationist. That the different, quote, ethnicities, at least is his mind, categorizing people by the color of their skin, but even then making some arbitrary choices in the middle of that, that for the good of all peoples, all races, all ethnicities in his mind, needed to be separated. There needed to be a separate location, and in particular, his idea was to send people to a carved out section of Africa. The black people go there, Asian people get sent back to Asia, so on and so forth, until there's only white people in the United States. That the United States it should be a white nation. It's a culturally white nation. It's a place for white people, and we have all the different colors of people in their different locations, and then the world will be a good place. I hope you see some of the beyond the definitions of who fits into what category. I hope you can see how that just wouldn't work for so many reasons. But it was still fascinating. It wasn't, I view myself as superior based on the color of my skin. It was, because of the color of my skin, I cannot relate to this other person. And the mixing of skin colors is also bad, because then those people won't be able to relate to anyone else. That part of this culture is color. Now, in the end, he did also view white culture as a superior culture. And this is one of the few places where Christianity had any mention, but it was really culture, not actual biblical Christianity. It wasn't the gospel. It wasn't salvation. It wasn't these aspects of Christianity, the things that actually transform you. It was just the cultural elements, that that the white people are a culturally Christian group, and thus, because we have this superior religion, then we have do have an elevated status. But then there's a degree of wanting to transmit that to others. But then it's like, if culture is explicitly attached to skin color, then how do you do that? You can't. So there was a lot of problems, but it was one of those things when you'd ask anything, it's, oh, well, that's a problem for later, essentially. Or it was to, you ask any sort of detailed question that goes beyond one of his quick answers or his circular reasoning or any of these other things. It's to resort to bullying and mocking. That was something I found fascinating. Whenever there was real pushback, whenever he couldn't just use his force of personality to dominate someone, which was really his main tactic. He wanted to be a forceful personality, not necessarily aggressive. Keep in mind, I'm saying something different there, but he just wanted to be able to intellectually bully you by just steamrolling over you and making you not want to continue the conversation and feel like you lost. Whenever you didn't let that tactic work and you pushed back and you asked a question that he couldn't answer, it was to then resort to bullying. Oh, well, you're just so on and so forth. Oh, I can't believe you. Oh, that's such a, that's not even that's a stupid question. That kind of stuff. So he had no answers. But it went so far beyond that. Like I said, I got to record an interview. I wasn't doing the interview. He was doing an interview with someone else. I went and did this interview for that person, not for the alt-right guy. But again, it was just fascinating. It was fascinating to learn about this belief system, learn about the details, the goals, some of this other stuff. Learn just how open he was about, oh yeah, we're going to implement a fascist dictatorship. We're going to bring in socialism, which, if you don't know, socialism is involved in fascism. If you didn't know that, it is not a truly right-wing ideology. You cannot have right-wing socialism. You can't have right-wing nationalization of property. But again, it was fascinating to hear these kind of things. And I think that there's multiple parallels here, because he was identifying that there were problems and he was fed up with the problems and he was willing to accept any solution. Now, his solutions were incoherent. Well, how can you have how's a good solution to have a dictatorship that you, by definition, allow to radically change the government into whatever form it deems expedient at the moment? That's a chaotic, that's anarchy, governmental anarchy. How can you justify that philosophically? How can you justify that biblically? It's incoherent. It's. I mean, that's exactly, that's North Korea. You suddenly become at the whim. Whatever goes on is at the whim of the dictator. It's so contrary to America, to our founding, to the limits that were placed because of the evilness, the wickedness of man, the limits that were placed on government, that because of the sinfulness and wickedness of man, we've pretty much just ignored completely over time. Yeah, if you didn't realize, that's the big reason that neither party, they only appeal to the Constitution when they want something. And that's why, because of the sinfulness and wickedness of man, they want to do evil. So they find ways to justify it. And this document was explicitly put there to say no. So of course they're going to, both sides, if they're not Christian, they're going to always rebel. And even if they are Christian, the Constitution wasn't made for an atheist secular society. It was made for a Christian society. Yet they still didn't trust. So Just important things. But again, his solution was just, we need a solution. I'm fed up with these things. I'm fed up with all of this. I'm going to scapegoat people. In this case, anyone that has a different skin tone than me, with an arbitrary cutoff, needs to get out. That's going to solve all the problems. And he really did. He really did. The more you talk with him, the more he put so many of the problems onto that. This is why definitions are important. Because again, some of his surface level stuff didn't sound as bad. And the way he tried to describe his white separationism, and he even brought in things like, oh, well, there's black separationists, and I actually spend time with some of them, and we get along, and we both understand that it'd be better if there was this separation. He's just trying to make it like this neutral good thing. And then you get into the actual details, and you're like, no, though it is not the KKK, it is not that kind of belief system. It is something definitely different and distinct from that. You still are bringing in a lot of partiality where there should not be partiality. A lot of distinctions where there is not true distinction. It's arbitrary. And you are judging people and rejecting people, even Christian. If you are the wrong skin tone and Christian, well, we still need to separate. We could share everything, language, culture, everything. Nope, got to be separate. And my daughter will not marry your son. Okay, oh boy. You've got a category that's beyond Christianity. But that really was the thing. He was not ashamed. He was not ashamed about his beliefs, and he didn't appeal to God's word to root these beliefs. This really was he was pretty honest about it. He didn't quite go this far in describing it, but functionally he did. It was a secular belief system that he was joining in with. And he was okay with that because it acknowledged Christianity as part of his culture, not the saving power and transformative power of Christianity, but just the cultural. And that really, and again, you more dive into that, and it was not true Christianity. It was just certain appearances. It's all about appearances. It's really the problem of the Catholic Church. Really the problem of the Catholic Church. It was not appealing to true biblical Christianity because it wanted the aesthetics, the appearance. It really did want medieval Catholicism. That's what it breaks down into. But why exactly am I bringing all this up? Like I said, there are some immediate parallels. You can just see the desire for solution. Recognizing problem, desire for solution. If we do not have a correct strategy and a correct solution, well, pointing out the problems is useless. And it's going to only lead people down mistaken paths like this. It's going to actually, if you raise issues without providing strategies and solutions, all you're going to do is create a vulnerability for something like this alt-right guy to manipulate that person into adopting a wicked belief system. So we have to have correct strategy. And I think this is something that's been lacking. Now, I think here at Aims Within the Church, we've been better than most. We don't just want to tell you, hey, here's the thing that's wrong. We want to talk about it a little bit more than that, a little bit deeper than that. But I think we still need to do more of that. We still need to have deeper conversations about strategy. And, this is going to be partially an introduction to that idea. I want to talk way more about strategy in this next season of the podcast. In fact, we're going to talk a little bit at the end of this episode about the future of the podcast, the next season, what next year is going to look like. And I'm going to be posting a little bit of a longer video of that on the Patreon and Give Send Go. So if you want to engage with the future of the podcast, you can go to those places and watch that short video and give me some feedback. But I mean, this is pretty obvious, but any strategy that is not centered on the gospel, and what do I mean by that? No, not broadening the gospel, the term, but centered on the work of Jesus Christ, what he has accomplished, and then from there, the implications of this gospel, salvation, evangelism, our great commissioning. Any strategy that's not rooted on the gospel as our most important thing, our central point, is going to produce less effective results. Not always necessarily wrong results or bad results, but less effective. We need to have that at the center. Hey, the reason we even care, the big reason we even care, that dwarfs everything else, is because of what Christ has done. And this gospel has the power to transform everything. And at the end of the age, there won't be anything that was not transformed, that was not renewed. So it really does need to be central to our strategy. And, that should always be a good question to ask. Well, how are we rooting this strategy for turning our society around? How are we rooting it in the gospel? How are we rooting it in what Christ has done? Are we rooting it in ourselves instead? Is it a selfish desire? Because it's easy to have selfish desires. It's even easy to have good selfish desires. Now, that sounds a little bit strange, but say my motivation is, well, I want my primary motivation, my number one, the central point. Again, you got to have priorities, your priorities straight. If my number one is, well, I want to protect my kids, well, then I got things out of whack. I cannot love my neighbor without first obeying and loving God. And in this sense, neighbor is just humanity. It's going to extend to family as well. Christ makes this clear. What does he say? Does he say, whoever loves their mother and, mother, father, sister, brother, whoever loves them, 90% of the way as much as they love me? No. He says, in order to follow him, you need to hate your family. Hate. Whoa, that's extreme. Well, yeah, he's making a point. Our loyalty to Christ immeasurably dwarfs everything else. Immeasurably. Because we're relating to an infinite God whose love for us is immeasurable. That relationship we now have with him, sealed by him, the love, we only know it because of him. It comes down from him. He is the sustainer of this relationship. It's measured by him. So if we then go, oh yeah, well then I'm going to compare my relationship with my wife or my kids or my extended family or my neighbor, whatever it is, with my relationship with God, well then you got it off base. Now the thing is, like a bomb being dropped, when you got your loves in order, your priorities straight, that the love of Christ hits us and explodes into every other aspect of our life. We're going to love our spouse more, our neighbors more, our children more when we have those priorities straight. So if our motivation is, hey, I want to do that, you might not think this is as big of a deal or as common as it actually is. But one of the things is partnerships with those outside of the church or those in a false church system. Again, to go to like Catholicism. When we partner with other people politically to see a change, we have to be very careful because by definition, we've now rooted it in a pragmatic reason, no longer on the gospel, person and work of Jesus Christ. And then from there, what he has personally done for us, the salvation he's brought for us. And then the outworking of that salvation, the process of our sanctification. We're wanting to be more and more like Christ. We are following his commands. Those are then coming into every aspect of our life, so on and so forth, building up this mass from this powerful kernel. If our strategy is let us partner on the pragmatic things, well, it's very easy for then that pragmatic thing to be our motivator. Are all partnerships with those outside of the faith wrong? Not inherently, but we need to have our group rooted in God's word, diving down until the central point of the gospel, person and work of Jesus Christ. And then once we have our group, we can say, hey, we've got this group. We're gunning for this. These are the reasons why. We're rooting them in God's word. Let's use abortion as an example. Hey, there are Mormons. You want to see this ended too. We have our group. Now, if you want to come alongside our group when we lobby lawmakers, you are allowed to join us. But we are not going to start a new organization together with you because we have fundamental differences. And in the end, though our goals are both stated as see abortion ended, your motivations and where you're going to take your goals are going to be different. Even if you want a very similar result, the ending of abortion, you want it for different reasons, from a different foundation. And what are you going to do once that's ended? What's your next task? What's your next thing you want to see changed? Well, that might be very different than ours. We also got to not be afraid to look at that person and go, my biggest priority to you is to see you transformed by the gospel, to see you come to Christ, to see you saved from eternal damnation. If you say, I got to hold off on that because I don't want to hurt this political partnership, well, your strategy's out of whack. You cannot win politically if you are not winning spiritually. And that is a huge, huge problem in this country. We are losing spiritually, yet we think we can win politically. When we are losing spiritually, how can we win politically? So yes, evangelism needs to be our big, big thing. Because guess what? Every person that comes to Christ, you just added a soldier to your ranks. I gotta be honest, that's a little bit more effective than trying to win with a dwindling army. So yeah, that's got to be centralized. So strategy-wise, we really need to realign things. What about solutions? Well, what is our end goal? What is our end goal? Oh, it's to fix the country. What does that mean? He wanted to, go back to that alt-right guy. He wanted to fix the country. He wanted to fix the country. That was his goal. So what does fix the country mean? And again, this goes back to the whole idea of it needs to be rooted in the gospel. Well, to fix this country, yeah, we want to see change in laws and policies. We want to see a biblical government in place. But that's not going to fix the country. That's going to fix a lot of problems. That's going to make life a lot easier for us. But that's not going to fix the country. Country is made up of people. It's a group of people. It's not a government. It's not just this idea, this abstract thing. It's people. So to fix the country, we have to change the people. Now, obviously, a country with just laws is going to be easier to operate within, easier to see change come about than in a country with unjust laws. But we've got to be uncompromising about that. We cannot just be like, oh, well, let's get the good laws we can get in place now. Well, and in order to get that, we have to also support some bad laws. Unless you're legitimately seeing significant changes spiritually, that's only going to lead to more and more compromise. Best we can do politically right now is just hold the fort. Hold the fort. We're not going to win. We're seeing a dwindling number. Now, I know people are going to be like, oh, well, look at this last election. I am. Anything good? There's also bad. We're not going to go deep into it, but Trump's appointees have sometimes been pretty decent, sometimes been putting the problem people into places of powers. I baffled. For one thing, I'll say that he has not learned his lessons from 2020. So we're not going to see this radical change. That's the big point right there, is we're not going to see this radical change. The country didn't suddenly get more conservative. They got fed up with certain things, but the country didn't suddenly get more conservative. Beyond that, we need to stop freaking out about an election. We need to worry about the next 20 years. The next 20 years. What's going to be the future? What's that going to look like? So we need long-term goals. We need to root our goals in total change, in a spiritual change within this country. Again, everyone we see come to Christ is another soldier added. The ability to make larger and larger changes suddenly becomes easier and easier. So we need to be clear about what our goals are and the strategies to accomplish them. But one of the things I want to point out about, going back to my initial story about that alt-right guy, getting to talk with him made me realize that he's not alone. And his ideas, at the time he wasn't alone, but his ideas, when they sort of fell out of favor, when the movement sort of fizzled down, didn't go away. And the angst that he was feeling and the need to do something and wanting something radical that he can grasp onto, still alive and well. So many young men that are just fed up and they want something. They're in the same position as that guy, and they're bringing in so many of the same ideas. My goodness, getting to talk with him and then hearing certain people online agitators nowadays, boy, are they just repeating the same things he was with just slightly more Christian language. And now I'm sure you're thinking, oh, well, Kyle, you're talking about this guy or that guy. Probably not. But even some of the guys that I wouldn't just say, hey, they're out there, they're radical. They still spout off some of this stuff because it sounds good. They just haven't really thought it through. They haven't thought about strategy and goals, not in the more long-term total sense that I've been talking about. They want quick fixes. Well, there are no quick fixes to where we're at. I mean, a church situation, let's just say that, church situation that I'm connected to, guy has totally his angst and his frustration with the problems in society nowadays boiled over, and he went way down the rabbit trail of this kind of stuff. Now he's not spouting some of the uh, hey, we need to separate along color lines type of stuff, but he's still going in for some of the more heavy-handed approaches towards things, some of the uh, more aggressive, assertive stances on things that are not going to produce actual change. Not going to produce actual change. This love with power and authority in a way that's not rooted in God's word, that's rooted in what can I get? It's rooted in self. And that's really this guy's problem. He's being removed from his position in a church because he's made himself his own authority, his own God. Even the Bible is judged by his opinion at this point. It's shocking to see. Rebelled against all biblical authority in the church, rebelled against all any attempts to reconcile. There is no discussion. His opinion is right. And he knows how to fix anything and everything. Yet he's rejected. And it's this very authoritarian view of government, of church, marriage, everything. And no, it's not, he just wants sort of a strong, no. Like, it really is authoritarian. But he wants all that, yet he rebels against authority. That's one of the bizarre ironies that I've seen, is these strong men put themselves in the position where they're their own authorities, and they rebel against every other authority in their life. Well, how can you going back to strategy, how is that going to bring about any sort of solution? How is that a strategy? I want authority, so I'm going to rebel against all authority. How does that make any sense? But there are many young men that are so attracted because they just want a solution, because they've been told by the society that they're the worst possible thing. Oh, young Christian man, you're the worst possible thing. And they have angst. They see problems, and they're not seeing strategies to bring about good solutions. So they're going to anything they can. Again, we need to deal with that. Get these young men, get their energy in the right places, get them under good biblical authority. Show them what authority is. Train them up and start seeing this country changed. There are so many phenomenal mission opportunities right now. I was so baffled by 2020. How much we dropped the ball evangelistically. Such a prime opportunity. Such a prime opportunity to be out there preaching the gospel. Instead, some churches went in a woke direction. Other churches, God bless them for standing up for their own church, but they weren't. That was the time to get out into the streets and start preaching. is really double down on evangelism and give people, your church should be open, and then make it a home, a refuge for people. But you don't just say, hey, we're here. You go out there and you bring the people in. Oh, it could have been such a beautiful thing. And it hurts that we were not more effective during that time. But there are so many opportunities right now. So many opportunities. People are looking for certain things. They want tradition, authority. They want something more real, grounded, and true. We need to give them that. We need to go back to the simplicity of the gospel and preach it. Instead, we're up in the air all over the place. I don't know. It's just frustrating. But like I said, next season on the podcast, we're going to get a little bit more into things like strategy and solutions and just rooting ourselves more in some strong teaching. And like I said, if you want to learn a little bit more about what I'm thinking for the future of the podcast for next season, you can go to the Patreon or the Give, Send, Go. I'm going to be posting an update on those. And I'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback because I want to be effective and efficient with this. I don't want to just be another voice. I want there to actually be value to this podcast, a reason for it existing, a reason for you to be listening. And not just trying to build a brand or not just trying to give you something edgy or new or not, whatever it is. I want to give you something that's actually useful, that helps you. If you're newer to the podcast, every year at the end of the year, Christmas time, and then through New Year's, take a break, get ready for the next season. So there's only going to be a few more episodes before we hit that, which is why I'm starting to talk about, hey, what's the next season going to look like? Because for me, the next season really starts in just a couple weeks when I have to start planning things. But yeah, like I said, if you want to contribute to that, learn a little bit more, go to those. We link down below. But God bless you. I hope this episode has really got you thinking. This is one of the big things. I want to get you thinking, engaged. So I hope it has. And if it's been useful, let me know. Let me know. If it wasn't useful or you're confused about anything, free to comment about that as well. If it was helpful for you, considering sharing it with someone, like I said, every time. Yeah, you want to just share it generically on your social media, that's fine. But share it with someone who you go, hey, this was useful to me, and I think specifically for you it would be useful as well. I want effective change, not just broad out all over the place. You can do that too. That's fine. I'm not banning you from doing that. But I just want you to be intentional about things. But God bless you. Thank you for joining us here on another episode of the podcast. And remember, don't go woke.